Dramily.com, unlimited drama series.
The wrench slipped from my grease-stained fingers as Marta's drunken laughter drifted through the garage window. At 11:30 on a Tuesday night, I was underneath my beat-up Honda, trying to fix what the mechanic quoted at $800. Meanwhile, my wife was upstairs with her best friend Gwen, apparently having the time of her life. God, David is so predictable, Marta's voice carried clearly through the autumn air. 22 years of marriage, and he still thinks I'm the same girl who married him in that tiny church in Bangor. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. The garage suddenly felt smaller, the shadows deeper. This was my house, my garage, my wife talking about me like I was some stranger. At least you have options now, Gwen replied, her voice slurred with wine. Kyle is definitely an upgrade in the excitement department. Those arms, that chest, when's the last time David even looked at a gym? Kyle. The name hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. Kyle Morrison, the golden boy personal trainer at Marta's fancy new gym downtown. The guy who looked like he stepped out of a fitness magazine, all perfect teeth and sculpted muscles. I'd met him exactly once at the gym's open house, where he'd given me a handshake that could crack walnuts and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You should see what he can do with those hands, Marta giggled. David just goes through the motions. Work, dinner, television, bed. Kyle makes me feel alive again. The wrench clattered to the concrete floor. 22 years. 22 years of building a life together, raising our daughter Amelia, surviving my business going under during the recession, supporting her through night school when she decided to chase her dreams in advertising. And this was how she talked about me. Are you going to tell David? Gwen asked. Eventually. Maybe. I don't know. Marta's voice grew quieter, more serious. He's so safe, boring. Kyle says I deserve better than a middle-aged manager who drives a car held together with duct tape and prayers. And I crawled out from under the Honda, my knees protesting against the cold concrete. Through the window, I could see them on the couch, wine glasses in hand. Marta's phone lighting up with notifications. Even from here, I could see her smile at whatever message had just arrived. Show me the latest, Gwen demanded, leaning closer to the phone. They huddled together, giggling like teenagers. My wife of 22 years, sharing intimate photos with her friend, discussing her affair like it was the latest episode of some reality show. The woman who'd promised to love me in sickness and health, for better or worse, was treating our marriage like a joke. I stood there in my garage, surrounded by the tools and projects that had always been my refuge, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The rational part of my brain told me to march upstairs, confront them both, demand explanations. The darker part, the part that was growing stronger by the second, whispered something else entirely. They wanted excitement? They thought I was predictable? I picked up the wrench, testing its weight in my hand. We'll see about that, I muttered to the empty garage. The house fell quiet around midnight. I heard Gwen's car pull out of the driveway, then Marta's footsteps on the stairs. She didn't check on me, didn't call goodnight, just went straight to our bedroom and closed the door. I sat in my garage until 3 in the morning, planning. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Typical Maine autumn weather that matched my mood perfectly. Marta was already gone when I dragged myself upstairs, leaving only the lingering scent of her expensive perfume and a coffee cup in the sink. A note on the counter informed me she had an early client meeting and wouldn't be home until late. Working late again, I said to the empty kitchen. Sure you are. Amelia wandered in around 10, home from college for a long weekend. At 19, she looked exactly like her mother had at that age. Long dark hair, sharp green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room when she chose to use it. This morning, that smile was nowhere to be found. Dad, we need to talk, she said, pouring herself coffee from the pot I'd made hours earlier. Good morning to you too, sweetheart. What's on your mind? She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals as a family. Her expression was serious, almost sad. Mom says you've been acting weird lately, suspicious. She's worried about you. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Worried about me? That's interesting. She says you've been checking up on her, asking too many questions about her schedule. She thinks you might be having some kind of midlife crisis. And I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of what she really knew. Amelia had always been perceptive, even as a child. She could read people, situations, the subtle currents that ran beneath the surface of family life. What do you think? I asked carefully. She shrugged, but her eyes didn't meet mine. I think maybe you both need to talk more. Really talk. Not just about schedules and bills and who's picking up groceries. You're right about that. After Amelia left to meet friends in town, I found myself alone in the house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. Marta's gym bag sat by the front door, forgotten in her rush to leave. I stared at it for a long moment, then picked it up. Inside were the usual things: workout clothes, water bottle, protein bars, her regular phone. But tucked into a side pocket, wrapped in a spare towel, was a second phone. A cheap prepaid model that I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I powered it on. No password protection, which seemed careless for someone conducting a secret affair. The message history made my stomach turn. Kyle. Can't wait to see you tonight. Same place? Marta. Yes. David thinks I'm working late on the Henderson account. Kyle. Good. Wear that red dress I like. Marta. The one David bought me for our anniversary? Perfect. There were photos, explicit ones, that I couldn't bring myself to look at for more than a few seconds. My wife, the mother of my child, the woman I'd shared everything with, sending pictures to another man that she'd never shared with me. I scrolled back through weeks of messages, each one a small knife to the heart. They'd been meeting at the Lakeside Inn, a cheap motel outside town. They laughed about my dad jokes and boring stories. Kyle called me the obstacle, and Marta didn't correct him. The worst part was how happy she sounded in these messages. Excited, passionate, alive in a way she hadn't been with me in years. Maybe I had become boring. Maybe I had stopped trying. But this wasn't the way to handle it. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, and spent the rest of the day in my garage, working on the Honda and thinking. By evening, I had a plan. The Riverside Tavern sat on the edge of town like a relic from another era. Dark wood, dim lighting, and the kind of atmosphere where people minded their own business. It was exactly the sort of place where someone might conduct an affair, thinking they were safe from prying eyes. I'd been sitting in my car across the street for 20 minutes when Marta's silver BMW pulled into the parking lot. She'd told me she was working late on a presentation, but here she was at 8:30 on a Thursday night, checking her appearance in the rearview mirror before walking into a dive bar. Kyle's red Mustang was already there, parked under a broken streetlight. The car was his pride and joy, a restored 1965 convertible that he'd spent more money on than most people made in a year. I'd heard him bragging about it at the gym's open house, how it was completely original, how he'd never let anyone else drive it. I waited another 10 minutes, then got out of my Honda. The October air was crisp, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and the distant promise of winter. Inside the tavern, I could see them through the window, sitting in a corner booth, hands intertwined across the table like teenagers in love. Instead of going inside, I walked around to the parking lot. Kyle's Mustang gleamed under the streetlight, all chrome and classic lines. Beautiful car. Shame about the owner. I pulled out my pocket knife and knelt beside the front tire. The rubber was expensive, probably cost more than my monthly car payment. I pressed the blade against the sidewall and pushed until I heard the satisfying hiss of escaping air. 3 more tires, 3 more hisses. By the time I was done, the Mustang was sitting on its rims like a wounded animal. I left a note under the windshield wiper. Hope your ride lasts longer than you do, Mounters a concerned citizen. Then I drove home and waited. Marta came home after midnight, claiming the presentation had run long and the team had gone out for drinks afterward. She was animated, excited, practically glowing with satisfaction. I nodded and smiled, and played the role of the understanding husband. How was your evening? She asked, already heading for the stairs. Quiet. Fixed the transmission leak on the Honda. Watched some television. You know, the usual boring stuff. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a moment, I thought she might say something real, something honest. Instead, she just smiled. Well, I'm exhausted. Big day tomorrow. Good night, David. Good night, sweetheart. I stayed downstairs until I heard her shower running, then checked the burner phone. Sure enough, There were frantic messages from Kyle about his car, theories about who might have done it, promises to find the psycho responsible. Marta played the supportive girlfriend perfectly, offering sympathy and outrage in equal measure. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a blurry photo of someone kneeling beside Kyle's car. The image was dark, taken from a distance, but it was clearly a person in dark clothes. It could have been anyone. The message that followed made my blood run cold. Thought Marta should know her husband is stalking her friends. Marn, concerned neighbor. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Someone had been watching, taking pictures. Someone knew what I'd done, and was willing to use it against me. Within an hour, Marta was home, storming through the front door like a hurricane. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she screamed, waving her phone in my face. "Are you following me now? Vandalizing other people's property?" I looked at the photo she showed me, the same blurry image I'd received. In the harsh light of day, with Marta's fury blazing at me, it felt different, smaller, petty. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said calmly. "Don't lie to me, David. This is you, isn't it? Sneaking around like some kind of stalker, destroying Kyle's car because you're jealous of him." "Jealous? Why would I be jealous of your personal trainer?" The question hung in the air between us. Marta's face went through a series of expressions: anger, fear, calculations. She was trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I'd figured out. "He's not just my trainer," she said finally. "He's my friend, and you slashed his tires like some kind of psychopath." "Did I? That's a serious accusation, Marta. Do you have proof?" She stared at me, and for the first time in months, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. The photo was circumstantial at best. No clear view of my face, no definitive evidence. Just someone in dark clothes doing something to a car. "I know it was you," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You know what I know?" I stood up, moving closer to her. "I know you've been lying to me. I know you haven't been working late nearly as often as you claim. I know you've been spending time with Kyle Morrison outside of the gym." Her face went pale. "You are following me." "I don't need to follow you, Marta. You're not as careful as you think you are." We stood there in our kitchen, 22 years of marriage hanging in the balance, both of us knowing that something fundamental had shifted. The pretense was cracking, the careful lies and polite deceptions falling away to reveal something uglier underneath. "We need to talk," she said finally. "Yes," I agreed, "we do," but we didn't talk. Not that day, and not for many days after. Instead, we circled each other like wary animals, each waiting for the other to make the next move. I didn't know it then, but the neighbor who'd taken that photo was Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down, a lonely widow with too much time and too many opinions about other people's business. She'd been watching our house for months, collecting gossip like some people collect stamps, and she was just getting started. The invitation arrived on expensive cardstock, delivered by hand to our front door. Marta's parents, Richard and Patricia Whitman, were hosting their annual autumn dinner party, a celebration of family and tradition, the invitation read, though I'd always suspected it was more about showing off their restored Victorian mansion and reminding everyone of their social standing in our small Maine town. "We have to go," Marta said, holding the invitation like it was a court summons. "Mother specifically asked about you. She wants to make sure you're holding up well after your recent stress." Recent stress. That was one way to describe discovering your wife's affair and beginning to plan your response. I wondered what version of events Marta had shared with her parents, how she'd spun the story to make herself the victim and me the unstable husband. "Of course we'll go," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." The Whitman house sat on Elm Street like a monument to old New England money. Richard had inherited it from his father, who'd inherited it from his father, creating an unbroken chain of Whitman prosperity that stretched back to the 1800s. The house had been featured in architectural magazines, toured by historical societies, and used as a backdrop for countless family photos that reinforced the Whitman legacy. I'd never felt comfortable there, even in the early days of my marriage, when Richard and Patricia had welcomed me as their daughter's choice. The rooms were too formal, the furniture too precious, the conversations too carefully orchestrated. Everything had its place, including the people. Tonight felt different. As we walked up the front steps, Marta's hand barely touching my arm, I sensed an atmosphere of expectation, as if the other guests were waiting for a show. "David!" Richard's voice boomed across the foyer as we entered. Good to see you, son. How are you holding up? There it was again, holding up, as if I were recovering from some illness or personal tragedy. Richard's handshake was firm, his smile warm, but his eyes were calculating. He was studying me, looking for cracks in the facade. I'm doing well, Richard. Thank you for asking. Glad to hear it. These things can be so difficult, but I'm sure you and Marta will work through whatever challenges you're facing. These things, challenges, the euphemisms were piling up like autumn leaves, each one carefully chosen to avoid saying what everyone was thinking. The dining room was full of familiar faces, neighbors, business associates, family friends who'd known Marta since she was a child. They all greeted me with the same careful warmth, the same searching looks, the same
She just gave me a massage! That's it!
Remember, I won't be a fool!
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
subtle questions about my well-being. Mrs. Henderson was there, of course, wearing a black dress that made her look like a professional mourner. She'd positioned herself near the appetizer table where she could observe everyone while maintaining plausible deniability about her eavesdropping. "David," she said as I approached the shrimp cocktail. "How nice to see you. I was just telling Patricia about all the excitement in our neighborhood lately." "Excitement? Oh, late-night visitors, cars parked in unusual places, people coming and going at odd hours. It's amazing what you notice when you can't sleep." Her smile was sharp as a knife blade. This was the woman who'd photographed me at Kyle's car, who'd sent that picture to Marta. She was enjoying this, feeding on the drama like some kind of emotional vampire. "Insomnia is terrible," I said. "Maybe you should talk to your doctor about something to help you sleep better." "Oh, I don't mind staying awake. You never know what you might see." Dinner was an elaborate affair, multiple courses served on china, that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I found myself seated between Patricia and Dr. James Morrison, a local physician who delivered half the babies in town, including Amelia. "Marta tells us you've been under some stress lately," Patricia said, as the salad course was served. Her voice was gentle, concerned, but there was steel underneath. Patricia Whitman had not built her social empire by being soft. "No more than usual," I replied. "Work, family, the normal pressures of middle age. Of course, but it's important to maintain perspective during difficult times. Marriage requires constant work, constant commitment from both partners." The emphasis on both was subtle but unmistakable. This was Patricia's way of telling me that whatever problems existed in my marriage, I bore equal responsibility for fixing them. "You're absolutely right," I said. "Both partners need to be honest with each other, faithful to their commitments, respectful of the promises they've made." Patricia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She was smart enough to recognize the double meaning in my words, the implication that perhaps not all partners were living up to their commitments. "Exactly," she said carefully. "Trust is the foundation of any successful marriage." Across the table, Marta was deep in conversation with Kyle Morrison, Dr. Morrison's nephew, as it turned out. Kyle had been invited as a last-minute addition, filling in for someone who'd canceled due to illness. What a convenient coincidence. He looked different in a suit and tie, more sophisticated than the gym rat I'd met before. But his smile was the same, that practiced charm that probably worked on lonely housewives and impressionable women. He was telling some story about his fitness business, how he was expanding into corporate wellness programs and high-end personal training. "Kyle is such an entrepreneur," Patricia said, following my gaze. "So ambitious, so dedicated to helping people improve their lives. Marta has been telling us wonderful things about his training methods." "I'll bet she has," I thought. "He certainly seems popular. Very popular. He's helped so many people in town discover new energy, new passion for life. It's remarkable what the right guidance can do for someone who's been feeling stagnant." The word hit like a slap. Stagnant. That's how they saw me, how Marta had described me to her parents. Not struggling or tired or overwhelmed by life's challenges. Stagnant, like a pond that had stopped flowing, become murky and lifeless. "Change can be good," I agreed. "Sometimes people need to shake things up, break out of old patterns that aren't serving them anymore." Patricia smiled, but her eyes were wary. "As long as the changes are positive, constructive rather than destructive." And conversation continued around me, but I was no longer listening. Instead, I was watching Kyle charm the room, watching Marta light up whenever he spoke, watching the other guests respond to his presence like flowers turning toward the sun. He was everything I wasn't: young, handsome, successful, exciting. He represented possibility, adventure, passion. I represented routine, responsibility, the slow accumulation of years and compromises that made up a real marriage. But there was something else I noticed. Something that gave me the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in weeks. Kyle was trying too hard. His stories were too polished, his charm too practiced. He was performing, just like I was, but his performance was designed to impress rather than conceal. And performances, I was learning, could be turned against the performer. After dinner, as the guests mingled over coffee and dessert, I found myself alone with Richard in his study. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a man of his generation and social standing. Leather-bound books, oil paintings of stern ancestors, a massive desk that had probably witnessed decades of important family decisions. "I wanted to speak with you privately," Richard said, closing the door behind us. "About Marta." What about her?" "She's my daughter, David, my only child. Her happiness means everything to Patricia and me." I waited for him to continue, sensing that this was a conversation he'd been planning for weeks. "Marriage isn't easy," he said finally. "Patricia and I have had our challenges over the years. Times when we wondered if we were right for each other, if we'd made a mistake. But we worked through those doubts because we understood that commitment means more than just feelings." I couldn't agree more. "Good, because I'd hate to see Marta make any impulsive decisions based on temporary emotions. She's always been passionate, quick to act on her feelings without considering the long-term consequences." This was as close as Richard would come to acknowledging his daughter's affair. He knew, but he wasn't going to say it directly. Instead, he was asking me to be the understanding husband, to weather the storm and wait for Marta to come to her senses. "What if the decisions aren't temporary?" I asked. "What if they represent something deeper, more fundamental?" Richard's face hardened. "Then I suppose everyone involved will have to live with the consequences of their choices." "Yes," I said, "they will." We rejoined the party, but the evening's spell was broken for me. I could see the careful choreography now, the way everyone was managing the situation, trying to contain the damage while avoiding any direct confrontation with reality. But reality had a way of asserting itself, regardless of how carefully people tried to manage it. As we were leaving, Kyle approached me near the front door. Up close, I could see the calculation in his eyes, the predatory confidence of a man who'd never been seriously challenged. "David, right? We met at the gym a few months ago." "I remember. I just wanted to say, Marta talks about you all the time. You're a lucky man to have such a devoted wife." The audacity was breathtaking. He was standing in front of me, in front of a room full of people, talking about my wife while conducting an affair with her. The sheer arrogance of it made my hands clench into fists. "Yes," I said quietly. "I am lucky, and I don't give up the things I'm lucky to have." Kyle's smile faltered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. "Of course not. A man should fight for what's important to him." Exactly what I was thinking. We stared at each other for a long moment, the polite facade finally dropping away. This was a declaration of war, civilized and subtle but unmistakable. Kyle extended his hand. "It was good talking with you, David." I shook his hand, squeezing just hard enough to make him wince. "Likewise, Kyle. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other soon." As we drove home, Marta was unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. "You were rude to Kyle tonight." "Was I? I thought we had a very honest conversation. He's trying to be friendly, and you're treating him like an enemy." "Maybe that's because he is an enemy." She turned to stare at me, her face pale in the dashboard light. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not as stupid as everyone seems to think I am, Marta. And I'm not as weak as you hope I am." We drove the rest of the way home in silence, but I could feel something shifting between us. The careful dance was ending. Soon, we'd have to stop pretending and deal with what was really happening. I was almost looking forward to it. 3 days after the dinner party, everything exploded. I was in my office at Morrison Insurance, no relation to Kyle, thankfully, when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Text after text, each one containing a link to the same TikTok video. The preview image showed Amelia sitting in her dorm room, tears streaming down her face. With a sinking heart, I clicked play. "So my dad is basically stalking my mom and her friends," Amelia said to the camera, her voice thick with emotion. "He slashed some guy's tires because he's paranoid and jealous. My mom is scared to come home some nights because she doesn't know what he might do next." The video was titled, "When Your Parent Becomes Toxic," and it already had over 50,000 views. In the comments, hundreds of strangers were offering support, sharing their own stories, and calling me everything from controlling to dangerous. My daughter had just destroyed my reputation in front of the entire internet. I sat in my office, staring at my phone, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about my relationship with my child, my standing in the community, my entire identity as a husband and father. My assistant knocked on the door. "David, your wife is here. She says it's urgent." Marta walked into my office like she owned the place, her face flushed with righteous anger. She closed the door behind her and turned to face me with the fury of a woman who finally held all the cards. "Congratulations," she said. "You've officially become a social media sensation." "Mionibem, I saw the video." "Good. Then you know that everyone can see what kind of man you really are. Controlling, paranoid, unstable." Amelia was crying when she called me. "She's embarrassed to be your daughter." The words hit like physical blows. Whatever I'd done, whatever mistakes I'd made, I'd never wanted to hurt Amelia. She was the best thing to come out of our marriage, the one pure and innocent victim in this whole mess. "Why did she make that video?" I asked. "Because she's scared of you. Because she sees how you've been acting, how you've been treating me, and she doesn't recognize her father anymore. How I've been treating you." "Marta, you're having an affair." She laughed, a bitter sound that filled the small office. "Prove it." "I don't need to prove it. I know it, you know it, and apparently your parents know it too. What I know is that you've become obsessed with controlling me, following me, checking up on me, vandalizing other people's property because you can't handle the fact that I have friends and interests outside of our marriage." The gaslighting was masterful. She was taking the truth and twisting it, making me question my own perceptions and memories. If I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might have started to believe her version of events. "This isn't over," I said quietly. "Yes, it is. I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm asking for a restraining order. After that video goes viral, I don't think any judge will have trouble believing that you're a threat to my safety." "Miam." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and David, I'm taking the house, and half of everything else. After 22 years of supporting your mediocre career and boring personality, I think I've earned it." Then she was gone, leaving me alone in my office with the wreckage of my life scattered around me like broken glass. But Marta had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that destroying my reputation would destroy my resolve. Instead, it had the opposite effect. I had nothing left to lose now, which meant I was finally free to do what needed to be done. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls, cashing in favors, and putting together the pieces of a plan that had been forming in my mind for weeks. By evening, I was ready to begin the final phase of my revenge. The first call was to Detective Ray Sullivan, an old friend from high school who worked for the Maine State Police. Ray had been investigating insurance fraud for 15 years, and he owed me a favor from a case I'd helped him with the previous year. "Ray, it's David Parker. I need to ask you about something, off the record." "Sure, Dave. What's up?" "Hypothetically, if someone was running a business but not reporting all their income, how would that come to light?" "Hypothetically, usually through a tip from someone with access to financial records." "Why?" "Just curious about how these things work." "Dave, you're not thinking about doing something stupid, are you?" "Just trying to understand the system, Ray. Thanks for the information." The second call was to Marcus Webb, a private investigator who specialized in matrimonial cases. Marcus had a reputation for being thorough, discreet, and completely unscrupulous when it came to gathering evidence. "I need you to follow someone," I told him. "Document everything they do, everyone they meet with, every place they go. Money is no object. How long do you want surveillance?" "Until I tell you to stop." The third call was the most important one. I dialed the number for Kyle's gym and asked to speak to the owner. "This is David Parker. I think we need to meet." The gym owner turned out to be Kyle's wife. Her name was Jennifer Morrison, and she was everything Kyle had described in his messages to Marta. Beautiful, successful, and completely unaware of her husband's extracurricular activities. She owned 3 fitness centers in Maine, employed over 50 people, and had built her business from nothing over the past decade. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, far enough from our small town to avoid curious neighbors. Jennifer was suspicious at first, wondering why a stranger wanted to discuss her husband. But her attitude changed quickly when I showed her the photos from Marta's burner phone. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "At least 3 months, based on what I've found. Probably longer." She stared at the photos, her face cycling through emotions: shock, hurt, anger, and finally, cold calculation. "What do you want from me?" "I want Kyle to face consequences for his actions. Real consequences, not just the inconvenience of a divorce." "What kind of consequences?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Kyle has been using your gym facilities for personal training sessions that he doesn't report to you. He's been taking cash payments and not declaring them on his taxes. He's been using the gym's equipment and reputation to build his own client base, then poaching those clients for his private business." Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been watching him. And because men like Kyle always get careless when they think they're untouchable." "You have proof?" "I can get proof. The question is, what are you willing to do with it?" Jennifer Morrison was not the kind of woman who forgave betrayal. By